Every 4 years, the world stops. Streets empty out, offices fall silent, and billions of people across every continent turn their eyes to a single ball rolling across a field of grass. It's not a war, not an election, not a natural phenomenon. It's the FIFA World Cup. And for one glorious month, it becomes the closest thing humanity has to a shared heartbeat. But how did a simple ball game become the most watched event on the planet? Let's rewind all the way back to where it all began. Our story starts in Uruguay in 1930. Football had already spread across Europe and South America, carried by sailors, workers, and colonial trade routes. But there was no single tournament to crown a true world champion. FIFA, founded just over 2 decades earlier, decided it was time to change that. Uruguay was chosen as host, partly because the Uruguayan national team had just won back-to-back Olympic gold medals, and partly because the country agreed to cover the travel costs of visiting teams, a huge deal in the midst of a global economic depression. Getting there wasn't easy. Several European teams had to cross the Atlantic by boat, a journey that took over 2 weeks. In the end, 13 teams competed, and on July 30th, 1930, host nation Uruguay defeated Argentina 4-2 in front of nearly 100,000 fans at the newly built Estadio Centenario. A trophy was born, and so was a tradition. The next 2 tournaments, held in Italy in 1934 and France in 1938, showed the World Cup's growing ambition, but also its fragile place in an increasingly unstable world. Italy's fascist government under Mussolini treated their home victory in 1934 as a political triumph, using the tournament as propaganda for the regime. 4 years later in France, Italy repeated as champions, becoming the first team to win back-to-back titles. But storm clouds were gathering over Europe. As World War II erupted, the World Cup itself became one of its casualties. There would be no tournaments in 1942 or 1946. For 12 years, the trophy sat quietly, some say literally hidden in a shoebox under a bed in Italy to protect it from Nazi forces, while the world fought a war far larger than any game. When football finally returned in 1950, it returned to Brazil, and it returned with one of the most stunning upsets in sports history. Brazil had built a brand new stadium, the Maracanã, capable of holding an almost unimaginable 200,000 spectators, and they were expected to win comfortably on home soil. In the deciding match, they only needed a draw against Uruguay to be crowned champions. Uruguay had other ideas. In front of the largest crowd ever to watch a football match, Uruguay won 2-1, silencing an entire nation in what Brazilians still call the Maracanazo, the Maracanã blow. It remains one of the most painful moments in Brazilian sporting history, and proof that on any given day, the underdog can topple a giant. The 1950s and 60s saw the World Cup mature into a truly global spectacle, and they introduced the world to a teenager who would become the greatest player many have ever seen. In 1958 in Sweden, a 17-year-old named Pelé exploded onto the scene, scoring twice in the final as Brazil won their first title. He would go on to win 2 more World Cups in 1962 and unforgettably in 1970, cementing Brazil's identity as the spiritual home of beautiful, attacking football. The 1966 tournament in England gave the host nation its only title to date, controversial to this day for a goal that may or may not have crossed the line, forever debated in pubs across the country. And in 1970, Brazil's team featuring Pelé, alongside stars like Jairzinho and Rivellino, is still considered by many historians to be the greatest World Cup team ever assembled. The 1970s and 80s brought us drama, politics, and another footballing genius. The 1978 tournament, held in Argentina under a brutal military dictatorship, saw the host nation win its first title amid allegations of match fixing and human rights concerns that still color how that tournament is remembered. But it was 1986 in Mexico that gave us one of the sport's most iconic and controversial figures at his absolute peak. Diego Maradona single-handedly dragged Argentina to the title, scoring what fans call the goal of the century, a mesmerizing solo run past 5 England players, just minutes after infamously punching the ball into the net with his hand, an act he later described with a wink as the hand of God. Love him or hate him, No one could deny his genius, and Maradona became a symbol of how one transcendent talent could carry an entire nation on his back. As the 20th century wound down, the World Cup kept growing both in size and ambition. The tournament expanded from 16 teams to 24 in 1982 and then to 32 teams in 1998, opening the door for nations from Africa, Asia, and North America to regularly compete on the world stage. The 1994 tournament made history by being held in the United States, a country where soccer had never been the dominant sport, and it drew record attendance figures that still stand today. 4 years later, France hosted and won its first title on home soil, led by Zinedine Zidane, who would go on to become one of the era's defining players. The World Cup was no longer just a European and South American affair. It had truly become a global phenomenon, broadcast to billions of homes in a way earlier generations could never have imagined. The 2000s and 2010s brought new technology, new powerhouses, and new heartbreak. In 2002, Japan and South Korea became the first co-hosts and the first Asian hosts, showcasing football's expanding footprint. In 2006, Zidane bid farewell to the sport in the most Zidane way possible, headbutting an opponent in the final and getting sent off in what would be his very last match. Spain's Golden Generation won their first title in 2010, built on the tiki-taka style that dominated European football for years. And in 2014, back in Brazil, host nation heartbreak returned in devastating fashion as Germany demolished the Brazilian team 7-1 in the semifinal, a scoreline so shocking it's simply remembered as the Mineirazo. Germany went on to lift the trophy, proving that ruthless efficiency could triumph over flair. More recently, the tournament has continued to push boundaries. The 2018 World Cup in Russia introduced VR, the video assistant referee system, changing how controversial decisions were made forever, for better or worse, depending who you ask. And 2022 in Qatar gave us what many are calling the greatest final in World Cup history, as Argentina and France battled to a 3-3 draw before Argentina won on penalties, delivering Lionel Messi the one trophy that had eluded him his entire legendary career. It was a fitting, emotional capstone to one of the greatest individual careers the sport has ever seen, and a reminder that even in a tournament steeped in nearly a century of history, new legends are still being written. Beyond the trophies and the goals, the World Cup has always been about something bigger. It's a stage where underdog nations like Senegal in 2002 or Costa Rica in 2014 can shock the world's giants. It's an economic engine, generating billions of dollars for host countries and reshaping cities with new stadiums and infrastructure. And it's a cultural touchstone, uniting people across language, religion, and politics for just a few weeks every 4 years, even if only temporarily. Critics point to the human cost of hosting, the corruption scandals that have plagued FIFA, and the commercialization of the sport, valid concerns that continue to shape conversations about the tournament's future. But even its harshest critics can't deny its power to bring the world together in a way almost nothing else can. The stadiums themselves have become legends in their own right. The Maracanã in Brazil, the Azteca in Mexico, Wembley in England. Each one carries decades of history in its concrete and steel, hosting not just matches but moments that define entire generations. The Azteca stands alone as the only stadium to host 2 World Cup finals, in 1970 and again in 1986, making it hallowed ground for football fans everywhere. Modern stadiums built for recent tournaments, like those in Qatar, pushed architectural boundaries with retractable roofs and climate-controlled interiors, allowing football to be played in comfort, even in desert heat. Each host nation leaves its own fingerprint on the tournament, infusing it with local culture, cuisine, and celebration, so that the World Cup becomes not just a competition, but a snapshot of the host country's identity presented to the entire planet. Rivalries have always been the lifeblood of the tournament's drama. Brazil and Argentina's rivalry stretches back generations, rooted in geographic proximity and a shared obsession with football supremacy in South America. Germany and the Netherlands have clashed in multiple unforgettable finals and semifinals, each match dripping with tension from decades of competitive history. England and Argentina's rivalry gained a political edge after the Falklands War, adding real-world weight to their meetings on the pitch, most famously in that controversial 1986 quarterfinal. And host nations facing former colonial powers or historic enemies meeting on neutral footballing ground have given the World Cup some of its most emotionally charged moments. These rivalries remind us that football is never just about the score. It's about identity, pride, and decades of shared history colliding for 90 minutes at a time. The tournament has also been a launching pad for iconic moments that transcend the sport entirely. Think of the sheer joy on the faces of a nation experiencing its first ever World Cup victory, or the collective heartbreak of a country watching their heroes fall just short. Think of underdog nations like Costa Rica or Senegal making unexpected runs deep into the tournament, capturing hearts far beyond their own borders. These stories get retold for decades, passed down from parents to children, becoming part of a nation's collective memory in the same way as major historical events. That's the strange magic of the World Cup. A game played by 22 people on a field somehow becomes a shared inheritance for entire nations, stitched into their cultural fabric alongside their music, their art, and their history. Looking ahead, the World Cup keeps evolving. The 2026 tournament will be the largest yet, expanding to 48 teams and being co-hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. A historic first for 3 nations sharing hosting duties. New stars are emerging every cycle, ready to become the next Pelé, the next Maradona, the next Messi. And somewhere out there, a kid is kicking a ball against a wall right now, dreaming of one day scoring the winning goal on the biggest stage in sports. That's the magic of the World Cup. It's not just a tournament. It's nearly a century of stories, heartbreaks, triumphs, and legends. And the next chapter is always just around the corner. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. One more thing worth mentioning is how the World Cup has shaped the careers and legacies of managers as much as players. Legendary coaches like Vittorio Pozzo, who led Italy to back-to-back titles in the 1930s, or more recently figures like Didier Deschamps, who won the tournament both as a player and a manager with France, show that tactical genius on the sidelines can be just as decisive as brilliance on the pitch. Some managers become synonymous with a golden generation of players, guiding raw talent into a cohesive trophy-winning unit. Others are remembered for their tactical innovations, introducing formations and philosophies that ripple through the sport for decades afterward. The chess match between opposing coaches, often overlooked by casual fans, adds another fascinating layer to the drama unfolding on the field. We also can't talk about World Cup history without mentioning the qualification journey that precedes the tournament itself. For every team that makes it to the final 32, or now 48, there are hundreds of nations who spend nearly 2 years playing qualification matches across every continent, hoping for their shot at glory. Small footballing nations pour their hearts into these campaigns, knowing that even qualifying for the World Cup, let alone winning a match, would be a historic achievement for their country. This global qualification process is what makes the World Cup truly represent the entire planet, not just the traditional football powerhouses. It's democracy in sporting form, giving every nation, no matter how small, a chance to dream. And then there's the broadcasting revolution that transformed how we experience the tournament. The 1954 World Cup in Switzerland was the first to be broadcast on television, reaching a modest audience compared to today's standards. By the 1970 tournament in Mexico, color television broadcast brought the vibrant green pitches and colorful kits into homes worldwide for the first time. Fast forward to today, and the World Cup final is watched by well over 1 billion people across every time zone, translated into dozens of languages, streamed on devices that didn't exist a generation ago. This technological evolution mirrors the tournament's own growth, from a modest gathering of 13 teams in Uruguay to a truly planetary spectacle uniting humanity across every possible boundary.